Now let's study about data binding. So what exactly is data binding? Data binding is the flow between template and the component class. In short, it means how we can transfer the data from the TypeScript code to the HTML page. Or we can say that if we have if I have some data in some variable which is inside that class which we have defined in the component, uh, from that the variable needs to go to HTML file. Right now these two things are in different files. So how can we actually convert this? How can we transfer this variable into into the HTML file? So let's look into our code and we'll see how we can do that in different ways. So we open our text editor uh, and there let's delete this. This is our first component.html file. Let's delete this and also delete this paragraph tag. Let's write our h2 tag here. And within this h2 tag, we'll use two curly braces. And within these two curly braces, we can write our JavaScript now, or you can say we can write our TypeScript, some some part of TypeScript now. So what if I write 1 plus 1 here? Let's save this and let's go back to our page. We can see 2 here. So the JavaScript is when the Angular comes on this to code, it sees the two curly braces. It knows that whatever is inside it is a JavaScript code or a TypeScript code, and it executes it, and then the value becomes 2, and whatever the value is, it gets printed because the value is in h2 is in between the h2 element. Now we can use this and we can print our variables which we can define inside the class, this first component.ts file. So to define a property inside this class, before defining a property, we should know that each property of classes can be private or a public. So if the property is public, it can be accessed from outside. If the property is private, then it cannot be accessed from outside, which means every private property cannot be accessed from HTML class. So to define a public or a private property, we just write public. Then let's say X is our message is our variable name and it is of type string, and that string is equals to hello from component 1 or first. And to define it as a private, we just use private keyword. So by default, if nothing is given before this variable or a property, by default it is public, so it can be accessed from the HTML file. So we have defined our message property and it is equals to hello from component first. Let's save this and let's go to our HTML file, and within these two curly braces, let's use this message variable and let's save our file, and we'll go here. This is our HTML page and it says hello from the component first. So this value is being printed is this variable message, and this variable message is the message is a property which we defined inside the class. So this is how a property which is defined inside a class of the component is getting transferred to HTML page. And this is the data binding, and what we are doing is called interpolation. So this is how we do interpolation. Similarly, there are other ways, and this type of data binding is one directional. That's why it's called one directional data binding. So the other forms of one directional data bindings are property binding and event binding. Let's see how we can achieve those. So in property binding, we have class binding and style bindings. So let's first make some classes which we can actually implement inside our code. So we'll go to our first component.cs file, and inside this, let's create some classes. As we remember from the CSS, to create a class, we write dot, then we write the class name, and then within the curly brackets, we define the CSS for that particular element. Now let's define three different type of text so that we can apply them using Angular. Let's say this is equals to text success, and within this text success, the color of the text is green. And similarly, we can have another class which says text danger, and the color of the text is red. Similarly, we can say another property like italics, and the font style is italic. So we have these three classes. How we can use Angular to achieve or to apply these classes onto some HTML element. So within our HTML page, we select the element which we want to be applied, this property to be applied. We go there, and there we use some here we use an argument, and to use an Angular argument, we use this ng class inside this square bracket. So this is the input from Angular. This part is coming from Angular. So within the square bracket, we use ng class, and right in front of it, we give the variable name, or here we can write the JavaScript or the TypeScript. So let's leave it right now, and we'll go back to our component.ts file, and here we will define that object which will be passing in the HTML file, which will define how and which class should we apply to that h2 tag. Now inside this class, let's define an object which is message class, and this is equals to our first class was text success, and this is equals to maybe true. Similarly, we have text danger, and this is equals to, let's say, false for now. Similarly, we had text italics, and this is equals to false for now. So we have defined our message class, a message class object, which will be passing into an HTML. It takes all the classes which we want to apply and a Boolean in front of it to specify either we want to apply it or not. So we take this message class object name, and we go into our ng class equals to this object. Let's save this, and let's delete this message, or we can state, and let's go back to our slides. And we can see on our web page the class, the text class which was active right now was text success. That's why the text color converted into green. Now let's open it side by side. Now if we make the text italic equals to true, As we save it, the page automatically reloads and we have the text italic class along with text success class. Now let's make this false and save it, and the page automatically refreshes and it's only italic now. Now let's activate the text changer class using true right in front of it. So we have text italic and text changer at the same time. So this is how we use another binding method. It's called property binding, because we are binding the property of this h2 element with the help of square brackets and inside it using ng class. Similarly, we have ng style. So let's make a new element. Let's say another h2, and inside this we give ng style, and this will be equals to again some object. As we did it in ng class, similarly we'll make a new object for ng style, and let's say this is equals to message style, and this object will contain the styling for the particular element. Let's say the color is blue and the font style is italic. So we have made an object which will go to the ng style tag. We copy this element or the property, and in front of ng style, ng style property, we give that object, and inside this h2 we can write this is angular styling. Let's save this and go back to our page. We can see the text is the CSS is being applied onto that element, and all the CSS is actually coming from the TS file. This is where we have defined what the CSS should be, the style should be, and with the help of ng style, we have applied it onto an element. So this is again a property binding because we are defining a property of an element with the help of the the TypeScript code. And the last one of the one-way binding is event binding. What is event binding? Event binding is something similar to how we used to work with DOM events. So here we can have a DOM event and we will bind it to some variable or some object inside our TypeScript code. So let's have a button, and inside this button, let's have a variable. We'll call this variable as button variable pt, and let's define this pt here, and pt is of type string, and this is says please click me. Let's save our code and let's go back to our page and let's see we have got the button here which says please click me, and it does nothing on clicking because we have not attached any DOM event to it right till now. Now let's attach a DOM event using Angular, and we can do that uh, using our event binding. So we go back to this button, and here now we use parentheses, and inside this parentheses we say click. Now if the click is equals to, here we give the function or our method from a class which from the type which was inside the TypeScript code. So let's say this method is on. click, and because it's a method and it's a function, so we'll give a parentheses. So let's define this on click function or a method inside our class here. So we'll say this is our on click method, and uh, this is of type void, and within the curly bracket we have, we can change this pt variable and can change the string inside the button. So we'll say to access the public variable of this class, now we'll use this property as we studied earlier. To access them, use this keyword, then this, then pt. Now we can change this pt variable, the string inside it, and we can say you clicked. Now let's go back to our page, and we see here the button says please click me. And after we click it once, it says you clicked, because the DOM event click was attached to it, and on to that click function, we have this on click method binded to it. And what this on click uh, method does is it changes the variable data, and now the string says you clicked, and as it happens all automatically, the variable which is inside this button, the value changes, and as soon as we click it, the message changes along with that. So we see the new and updated message. Let's get back to our slide. So these are the one-way data binding which we just saw. The interpolation, the first one, there within this two curly braces, we give the JavaScript code or a TypeScript code, or we can simply pass in the variable name which we want to be printing here. Then we studied about the property binding. For the property binding, we use ng class and ng style. Please note that for property binding, we use square brackets, and for event binding, we use parentheses. So within this square bracket, we give the ng keywords, and those ng keywords were ng class and ng style. And ng class and ng style, in front of that, we gave the objects, and these objects were the one governing which class should be applied onto that particular element. And with the ng style, we can pass in the whole styling object, which in turn decide which property should be changed according to that object. Lastly, we use event binding. With the event binding, we give the event, the DOM event, inside this curly braces. That's why there's a difference. Within the square bracket, we give the Angular keyword, and within this parentheses, we give the JavaScript events or the DOM events. And within this parentheses, we gave click, and that was equals to one method which we defined on click. And as it was a method, we gave it with the parentheses. Now let's look at what exactly is template reference variable. Let's go to our code again, and here assume we want a search value to be given inside a variable, a TypeScript variable. Suppose we have a search box and there a user enters something, and whatever he or she enters, we want that value to be saved inside our variable. So we can do that using our reference variable like this. So first we know how do we make this reference variable. So let's create our search box. We use input, and then whatever we type inside this input, whatever we type inside this input, we can extract it using this element's value gets changed, and we can extract it from its value. So as in normal JavaScript, in normal HTML also, we give an ID to particular element so that later in JavaScript, we can refer to that ID and can operate onto that element and extract the values. Similarly here, we don't have to write that much of code. We just need to give a hashtag, then the ID or a variable name to this particular element. We can say it's my ID. And now in this whole HTML, we can refer to this element as my ID element. Now suppose uh, we also want to print whatever is being searched inside this input box whenever this button is clicked. So let's create a new h3 element, and inside it we give the search variable, which we'll define later in our class. So and on click method, now we can give it this my ID element. So now whatever is behind this hashtag is the variable, and we can use this variable name and we can give it and pass it to this function, and this whole element is will go inside this is being transferred to our class basically. So let's go back to our TypeScript code, and here uh, like earlier we didn't had anything, so we need to give it we like now we have a value in the parentheses. So let's define this as some element, and it can be of type any because we don't know what type of HTML element will be. So let's give an element parameter, and it can be of type any. And let's comment this out now. Now from this element, we want to get its value because this element is the input element. So element dot value will have that string or a text which is being searched. So we want this to be equal to the search variable which we defined inside this h3. So let's first define the string variable or the property here, search, and it is of type string, and this is right now an empty string. So now to access this search property, use this keyword, then search is equal to this element's value, and this is equals to this element's value. Now save this and go to our page again. So right now we don't have that h3 because right now there's nothing inside this input field. That's why the search string has nothing, and that's why nothing is printing here. Now let's say this is an input, and then we click onto this button. This is an input get printed here. Now I'll change this text. This is still an input, and click on this button again, and this text get changed again. We did what is something similar to as defining an ID, then extracting its element and assigning it to some other division and other values. But in Angular, we can do it simply using element reference element variable, and we can just define and give it some ID using hashtag, and we can use this inside our any JavaScript code. And it can give this variable name, and then we can access its property in the code itself. So this is how we do template reference variable. Let's go back to our slide. So see, we use hashtag then a variable name inside our HTML element. So in JS also we could access this element using DOM tree and read the element as element.value, which is something similar what we are doing in the TypeScript also, but it's just a bit shorter there. In Angular, we could use template reference variable, which is much more easier, obviously. Now let's get ahead and see what exactly are two-way binding. Because till now, whatever we learned will fall into one-way binding. Data was only going from one direction to other. But is there a way? Can we do the similar thing which we did? Type in the search box, and without clicking it, can it go to back and come to the front at the same time? That is something we do in a two-way binding.